There's a feeling most people have experienced at least once. You're walking through a parking lot, or sitting in a waiting room, or standing in line at a store you've never been to before, and something feels wrong. Not dangerous, exactly. Just misaligned, like the scene you're looking at has been arranged one step ahead of you. Most of the time, you dismiss it. You tell yourself you're being paranoid. You tell yourself that cities are full of people and sometimes you see the same face twice. That's statistics. That's life. But what if the person you keep seeing isn't following you at all? What if they already know where you're going and they're simply arriving first? The 5 stories you're about to hear were submitted anonymously by people across the United States. All names, locations, workplaces, and identifying details have been changed to protect their privacy. But the events they describe are grounded in the ordinary tools, permissions, and routines that most of us use every day without a second thought. These are not ghost stories. There is nothing supernatural waiting at the end. The threats in every one of these accounts are entirely human, and that's exactly what makes them difficult to forget. Story 1. He was always waiting ahead. I pulled into the motel parking lot at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. I want you to understand something about that motel. I had never been there before. I had never searched for it online. I had not typed the name or the address into my phone, my car's navigation system, or anything else. I hadn't told a single person where I was going because I didn't know myself until I saw the sign from the highway. It was a roadside place about 40 minutes south of the city, the kind with exterior doors and a neon vacancy sign buzzing over a small front office. I chose it because it appeared on the right side of the road at the exact moment I decided I needed to stop driving. I sat in the car for a few minutes. I checked my mirrors. I scanned the lot. There were maybe 8 or 9 other vehicles, most of them parked near rooms with dark windows. Nothing unusual. I grabbed my bag and walked inside. The lobby was small. Fluorescent lights, a rack of local brochures, a vending machine alcove to the left, a front desk with a silver bell, and nobody behind it. I could hear a television playing somewhere in the back office. I was about to ring the bell when I noticed him. He was sitting on a plastic chair beside the vending machines, legs crossed, hands resting on his knees. He was wearing a light gray zip-up jacket and dark jeans, clean shoes, average height, average build, brown hair cut short. He looked like anyone. He looked like no one. But I recognized him. I had been seeing this man for almost 3 weeks. He looked at me the way you might look at someone who arrived late to a meeting. Not angry, not surprised, just acknowledging. And then he said, calmly, like he was commenting on the weather, "You took longer than usual. I need to go back to the beginning. My name doesn't matter, but I'll use the one I was given for this. I'm Megan." At the time this happened, I was 29 years old, working as a registered nurse at a hospital in Minneapolis. I worked rotating shifts, mostly nights, which meant my schedule was structured but exhausting. I lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment about 15 minutes from the hospital. I had a cat, a modest social life, and a routine that I leaned on like a crutch because the job demanded so much from me that everything outside of it needed to be simple. Mornings after a night shift, I would stop at the same coffee shop on Lyndale Avenue. It was a small place, locally owned, with good drip coffee and a bench by the window where I could sit for 20 minutes and decompress before going home to sleep. I went there 3 or 4 times a week. I always ordered the same thing. The baristas knew my name. The first time I noticed him, he was sitting 2 tables away from my usual bench. Gray jacket, short brown hair. He was drinking coffee and looking at his phone. He didn't look at me. He didn't speak to me. I wouldn't have noticed him at all, except that he was sitting in a seat that was usually empty at that hour, and something about his posture struck me as very still, not relaxed, still, like someone who was waiting rather than resting. I didn't think about him again until 4 days later. I had come off a particularly difficult shift. One of my patients had coded twice, and although we got her back both times, I was rattled. I didn't feel like going to the coffee shop. I needed ibuprofen, and I realized I was almost out, so I stopped at a pharmacy on the way home. Not my usual pharmacy. This was a different chain on a different street, about 2 miles from my normal route. I went inside, grabbed what I needed, and stood in line. He was in the next aisle. Same gray jacket, same short hair. He was looking at a shelf of vitamins, holding a bottle in one hand and reading the label. He didn't glance in my direction. He didn't acknowledge me. But it was the same man from the coffee shop. I was certain. I told myself it was a coincidence. Minneapolis isn't a small town, but it's not enormous either. People's routines overlap. You see the same commuters, the same joggers, the same faces at the gas station. I paid for my ibuprofen and drove home and went to sleep and forgot about it. The third time broke the pattern of forgetting. It was the following week. I had deliberately gone to a grocery store across town, not because of the man. I hadn't been thinking about him. A coworker had recommended a specific brand of frozen meal, and the nearest store that carried it was a larger chain location, about 20 minutes east of my apartment. I drove there after an evening shift, parked, went inside, and spent about 15 minutes shopping. When I came out, he was leaning against a car 2 spots away from mine. Same jacket, same posture. He was looking at his phone. He did not look up. He did not move toward me. But he was there, and there was absolutely no reason for the same man to be at a coffee shop on Lyndale, a pharmacy on Cedar, and a grocery store on the other side of the city within the span of 10 days. I sat in my car with the doors locked and watched him. He finished whatever he was doing on his phone, got into his car, a dark blue sedan, clean but unremarkable, and drove away. He never looked at me once. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with the lights off and replayed the 3 encounters. I tried to convince myself that I was being irrational, that I was exhausted from work and pattern matching on coincidence. But something in my chest wouldn't settle. It was the way he never seemed surprised to see me. He wasn't reacting to my presence. He was already positioned, already settled, already waiting, like he had arrived before me every single time. I told my friend Dana. She was a respiratory therapist at the same hospital, and she was the kind of person who took things seriously without panicking. I described the man, the 3 locations, the gray jacket, the fact that he never spoke or approached me. Dana listened carefully and then asked the question I had been avoiding. Is he following you? I told her that was the thing. I had never seen him behind me. Not in a car, not on foot, not in a mirror or a window reflection. He was never approaching. He was always already there. Dana suggested I check my social media. I went through everything that night. I made my Instagram private. I deleted location tags from old posts. I changed my passwords on every account I could think of. I enabled 2-factor authentication on my email, my banking apps, and my cloud storage. I even went outside with a flashlight and crawled around my car, checking the wheel wells and the undercarriage for any kind of tracking device. I found nothing. The next morning, I called the non-emergency police line and explained the situation. The officer was polite, but direct. He told me that seeing the same person in public spaces, especially when that person hadn't made threats, hadn't communicated with me, and hadn't physically approached me, didn't meet the threshold for a police report. He suggested I document future sightings with photographs, times, and locations, and that if anything escalated, I should call back. I understood his position. I did. But I also understood mine. Something was wrong, and I could feel it the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. Not because anything visible has shifted, but because the stillness itself feels intentional. I stayed with Dana for 3 nights. I varied my driving routes. I went to different stores at different times. I skipped the coffee shop entirely. I told myself that if I disrupted my patterns, the coincidences would stop, and I'd know I had been overreacting. On the 4th day, I had a medical appointment. It was a routine follow-up with a specialist. I had booked it that same morning through the clinic's patient portal on my phone. I hadn't told anyone about it. I hadn't written it on a whiteboard or mentioned it to Dana. I logged in, selected the earliest available slot, confirmed it, and drove there. The office was in a small medical complex on the west side of the city. I parked and walked toward the entrance. He was sitting on a bench near the building's front door, scrolling through his phone. Gray jacket, short brown hair, calm, unhurried, like he'd been sitting there for 20 minutes, waiting for nothing in particular. He looked up as I passed. He didn't smile. He didn't speak, but his eyes tracked me to the door, and for the first time, I felt like he wanted me to know. Not that he was there. I already knew that. He wanted me to know that he knew, that wherever I went, whatever I decided, he would already be waiting. I went inside. I sat through my appointment without hearing a single thing the doctor said. My hands were shaking. When it was over, I left through a side exit I found near the restrooms and walked around the building to my car. He was gone. That night, I sat in Dana's living room and tried to think clearly. He wasn't following me. I was sure of that. I watched my mirrors obsessively now. I took random turns, doubled back on streets, circled blocks. He was never behind me. He was never beside me on the road. But he was always where I was going, sometimes before I had even decided to go there myself, except the medical appointment. I had decided that one on my phone that same morning, and he was there. That's when the idea of the motel test came to me. I didn't tell Dana. I didn't tell anyone. I left her apartment the next evening and drove south out of the city with no destination in mind. I didn't use my phone for navigation. I didn't search for hotels. I left my phone sitting on the passenger seat with the screen off. I just drove, letting the highway carry me, watching the exits go by until I saw a motel sign I'd never seen before and turned off. I've already told you what happened next. He was sitting in the lobby. He looked at me and said, "You took longer than usual. 5 words, no threat, no aggression. Just a statement of fact delivered by a man who should not have been there, could not have been there, unless he knew something I didn't." I turned around and walked out. I didn't respond. I didn't ask him how. I got in my car, locked the doors, and drove directly to the nearest police precinct, which was about 12 miles north. I walked inside at 10 past midnight, and I told the officer at the desk that I needed to speak to someone about being stalked. The officer who helped me was a detective named Garza. She was calm and methodical and asked the right questions without making me feel like I was wasting her time. I showed her the photographs I had taken at the grocery store and outside the medical complex. I described the coffee shop, the pharmacy, the motel. I gave her the dates, the times, and the description of the man and his car. She listened to all of it, and then she asked me to pull out my phone. "Walk me through every account that signed in on this device," she said. We went through them together: email, cloud storage, calendar, maps, location sharing. Everything looked normal. Then Garza asked me to check the active device list for my primary account, the one connected to my email, my calendar, my location sharing service, and my cloud-synced apps. I opened the settings and scrolled through the list. My phone was there, my laptop was there, and at the bottom, labeled with a generic device name and showing a last synced timestamp from earlier that day, was an Android tablet. I hadn't owned an Android tablet in almost a year. It came back to me in pieces. About 10 months earlier, I had upgraded my devices and sold the old tablet through an online resale marketplace. Before listing it, I had initiated a factory reset. I remembered starting the process. I remembered the screen going dark. I assumed it had completed. I packaged the tablet, shipped it to the buyer, and never thought about it again. Garza explained that a reset is not complete simply because the screen goes dark. If the process is interrupted before the wipe finishes, the device can restart with the old account session still present. I had packaged it without powering it on again to verify the reset. When the buyer turned it on, my account was still there, and instead of contacting me, he used it. That tablet was still connected to my life, my calendar, my map searches, my saved locations, my GPS position through a family location sharing feature I had turned on years ago and forgotten about. Every coffee shop I favorited, every address I searched, every appointment I booked. Email, cloud storage, calendar, maps, location sharing. Everything looked normal. Then Garza asked me to check the active device list for my primary account, the one connected to my email, my calendar, my location sharing service, and my cloud-synced apps. I opened the settings and scrolled through the list. My phone was there, my laptop was there, and at the bottom, labeled with a generic device name and showing a last synced timestamp from earlier that day, was an Android tablet. I hadn't owned an Android tablet in almost a year. It came back to me in pieces. About 10 months earlier, I had upgraded my devices and sold the old tablet through an online resale marketplace. Before listing it, I had initiated a factory reset. I remembered starting the process. I remembered the screen going dark. I assumed it had completed. I packaged the tablet, shipped it to the buyer, and never thought about it again. Garza explained that a reset is not complete simply because the screen goes dark. If the process is interrupted before the wipe finishes, the device can restart with the old account session still present. I had packaged it without powering it on again to verify the reset. When the buyer turned it on, my account was still there, and instead of contacting me, he used it. That tablet was still connected to my life, my calendar, my map searches, my saved locations, my GPS position through a family location sharing feature I had turned on years ago and forgotten about. Every coffee shop I favorited, every address I searched, every appointment I booked. It was all flowing to that device in real time without any notification appearing on my phone. Garza pulled the buyer's profile from the marketplace. I had never looked at it. There was a small profile photograph, slightly blurry, taken outdoors, and the moment I saw it, the air left my lungs. It was him. Same face, same short brown hair, same unremarkable features that let him sit in a coffee shop or lean against a car or wait on a bench without drawing attention. The man who bought my tablet had been reading my entire life through it, and instead of following me, he simply checked where I was going and arrived first. The investigation moved quickly after that. Garza coordinated with Minneapolis police, and once they built enough probable cause from the marketplace records, the account access logs and location sharing records, the photographs I had documented, position through a family location sharing feature I had turned on years ago and forgotten about. Every coffee shop I favorited, every address I searched, every appointment I booked. It was all flowing to that device in real time without any notification appearing on my phone. Garza pulled the buyer's profile from the marketplace. I had never looked at it. There was a small profile photograph, slightly blurry, taken outdoors, and the moment I saw it, the air left my lungs. It was him. Same face, same short brown hair, same unremarkable features that let him sit in a coffee shop or lean against a car or wait on a bench without drawing attention. The man who bought my tablet had been reading my entire life through it, and instead of following me, he simply checked where I was going and arrived first. The investigation moved quickly after that. Garza coordinated with Minneapolis police, and once they built enough probable cause from the marketplace records, the account access logs and location sharing records, the photographs I had documented, and the motel's lobby camera footage, they obtained a warrant for his apartment. I wasn't there for the search. I didn't want to be. But Garza told me what they found. Printed photographs of me at various locations, some taken from distances I hadn't been aware of. Handwritten schedules documenting my hospital shifts, which he had apparently pieced together from my calendar entries and recurring patterns. Printed maps of Minneapolis with circled locations, my apartment, my gym, the coffee shop, Dana's house, the hospital. Notebooks with entries describing my clothing, my arrival times, the cars parked near mine, and small behavioral notes. Things like left early, or seemed tired, or went to pharmacy instead. He had been doing this for months, long before I noticed him. The 3 weeks of sightings that had terrified me were only the end of something much longer. His name was eventually released to me through the legal process, but I won't use it here. He was 33 years old. He had no prior stalking convictions. He worked a normal job. He lived in a normal apartment. There was nothing about his life that would have raised a flag for anyone. He was charged, and a protective order was issued. The legal process was slow and frustrating, but it moved forward. I changed every password, signed out every active session, reset my recovery information, and reviewed every connected app before starting fresh. I went through my digital life the way you go through a house after a flood, pulling up every board to see what's underneath. I transferred to a different hospital. I moved to a different city. I didn't tell anyone the new address for weeks. I still check my account sessions at least once a day. I still look at the list of connected devices before I go to sleep, the way some people check their door locks. But the thing that stays with me, the thing I haven't been able to put down, came at the very end. Garza called me about 6 weeks after the arrest. She said that among the recovered notebooks, investigators had found a page near the back with a single address written on it. It was an apartment I had looked at online during my search for a new place to live. I had saved the listing. I had studied the photos. I had considered scheduling a tour. But I never contacted the landlord. I never visited the building. I never told anyone I was thinking about it. He had the address because I had saved the listing, and saving it synced to the same account that was still open on his tablet. He knew where I was thinking about moving before I had made the decision myself. I don't live at that address. I don't live anywhere he could have predicted. But sometimes, late at night, I think about the version of my life where I chose that apartment, where I moved in, arranged my furniture, locked the door, and believed I was starting over. And I wonder how long it would have taken me to see him sitting on the bench outside. Story 2. The car that never followed me. I have always been the kind of person who notices cars. I couldn't tell you why. My father wasn't a mechanic. I don't watch racing. I don't read car magazines. But ever since I was a teenager, I've had a habit of looking at vehicles the way other people look at faces. I notice the shape of the headlights. I notice bumper stickers, dents, aftermarket wheels, tinted windows, the little accessories hanging from rear-view mirrors. It's not something I do consciously. It's just how my brain files information about the world around me. That habit is probably the only reason I'm still telling this story instead of living inside it. My name is Rachel. I'm 34 years old, and I teach high school English in a suburb about 20 minutes outside of Columbus, Ohio. I've been at the same school for 9 years. I live alone in a small 2-bedroom house on a quiet street lined with maple trees. I have a dog, a garden that I neglect more than I should, and a routine that would probably bore most people to tears. Wake up at 6, coffee, school by 7:15. Home by 4 unless I have grading or a faculty meeting, errands on Saturday, reading on Sunday. That's my life. That's what I like about it. The first time I noticed the SUV, I was pulling out of the school parking lot on a Wednesday afternoon in late September. It was a black SUV, midsize, parked along the curb across from the visitor entrance. Tinted windows, clean, no dealership plate frame, no decals, no bumper stickers, just a plain black SUV sitting there with its engine off. I noticed it because it was parked in a spot where parents sometimes wait to pick up their kids, but school had let out over an hour earlier and the pickup line had long since cleared. I glanced at it as I drove past. Nothing about it seemed threatening. It was just an odd little detail my brain filed away. 2 days later, I saw it again. I had stopped at a bookstore on High Street after school. It's a used bookstore I visit maybe once a month, tucked between a pizza place and a laundromat. Parking on that block is tight, so I ended up in a small municipal lot around the corner. When I came out an hour later with 2 paperbacks in a plastic bag, I walked back toward my car and noticed a black SUV parked 3 spaces down from where I had parked. Tinted windows, same general shape, same clean condition. I stopped. I stared at it for maybe 10 seconds. Then I told myself that black SUVs are one of the most common vehicles on the road, and that I was standing in the middle of a public parking lot in the middle of a weekday, and that I needed to stop watching too many crime documentaries. I got in my car and drove home. The third sighting was harder to dismiss. The following Saturday, I met my friend Kelsey for dinner at a restaurant we like on the north side of town. It's about a 30-minute drive from my house. I parked in the restaurant's lot, went inside, had dinner, and stayed for almost 2 hours. When we walked out together around 9:30, I glanced across the lot and saw it. Black SUV, tinted windows, parked at the far end, near the exit onto the main road. The windows were too dark for me to see if anyone was inside. I pointed it out to Kelsey. She looked at it and shrugged. "It's just a car, Rach." She was right. It was just a car. But I stood there for a long moment, trying to make my eyes see something distinctive. A dent, a scratch, a sticker, anything I could use to know for certain whether this was the same vehicle I had seen twice before. I couldn't find anything. It was too clean, too generic, and I was too far away. I drove home and spent the entire night thinking about it. The next week, I started paying more attention. I would scan every parking lot I entered. I would check my mirrors more often. I looked for the SUV on the road, expecting it to appear behind me at some point, matching my turns, hanging back a few cars, doing the things stalkers are supposed to do in movies. I never saw it on the road, not once. But I saw it at the farmer's market that Saturday, parked along the curb near the entrance. I saw it in the parking lot of the strip mall where I got my hair cut. I saw it 2 blocks from Kelsey's house when I stopped by to drop off a book she had asked to borrow. Every time it was parked. Every time it was near where I had gone. And every time I could never quite prove to myself that it was the same SUV. I started varying my routes. I would take back roads to school instead of the main highway. I would leave the house at different times, sometimes stopping for gas or coffee first, sometimes going straight through. I would visit stores I didn't normally visit. I did everything I could think of to break my patterns, and the SUV kept appearing. Not always, but often enough that I couldn't convince myself it was coincidence anymore. The thing that started to unsettle me most wasn't the SUV itself. It was the absence of everything I expected. There was no car following me down the highway. There was no figure walking behind me in a parking lot. There was no one waiting outside my house at night. Whoever this was, they weren't chasing me. They were waiting for me. And that meant they knew where I was going before I got there. I finally decided to photograph it. The next time I saw it, in the parking lot of a coffee shop I had spontaneously stopped at on a Sunday morning, I pulled out my phone and took 3 pictures. I got the shape of the vehicle, the angle of the windshield, and a partial view of the license plate. The plate was covered in a fine layer of road dust that I noticed obscured 2 of the numbers in a very specific pattern. 4 days later, I saw the SUV again, parked outside a small nursery where I had gone to buy potting soil. Same dust pattern on the plate, same shape, same tinted windows. I took another photograph and compared it to the first one on my phone screen, right there in the parking lot. It was the same vehicle. There was no doubt. I still couldn't see who was driving it. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of wine and thought about who could possibly be doing this. I'm divorced, but my ex-husband and I parted amicably years ago. He lives in Michigan now. He has a new family. There's no reason he would do something like this, and it wasn't his car. I ran through the names of everyone I could think of who might hold a grudge. Old students, old boyfriends, a neighbor I had reported for playing loud music years ago. None of them fit. Then I thought about the dating app. I had signed up about 6 months earlier, after a lot of encouragement from Kelsey. I hadn't taken it seriously. I had matched with maybe 10 men over the course of 2 months, exchanged messages with 3 of them, and gone on exactly 1 first date. That first date had been coffee with a man named Brian. I drove there straight from school, and he was already sitting at a table by the window when I arrived. He was pleasant enough, mid-30s, worked in some kind of logistics job. Nothing about him had raised any red flags. But there hadn't been a spark either, and when he texted me the next day about a second date, I politely declined and wished him well. He didn't respond. I didn't think about him again. That date had happened a little over 4 months before I first noticed the SUV. I couldn't remember what he drove. I had been focused on finding a parking space and getting inside on time, and I never paid attention to where he had parked. The next morning, I called a mechanic. I have used the same shop for years. It's a small, independent garage owned by a man named Dale who does honest work and doesn't upsell me on things I don't need. I called him and asked if he could look my car over for anything unusual. I told him I thought someone might have put something on it. I expected him to laugh. He didn't. He told me to bring it in that afternoon. Dale put the car up on the lift and spent about 20 minutes underneath it with a flashlight. When he lowered the lift and waved me over, he was holding a small black object in his gloved hand. It was about the size of a matchbox, rectangular, slightly rounded at the edges, heavy for its size. Magnetic, he said. It was stuck to the frame rail behind your rear wheel well. Would have been almost impossible to see without knowing where to look. I stared at it. My hands went cold. "What is it?" I asked, even though I already knew. "GPS tracker," he said. "Consumer model. You can buy these online for around $100. They report location to a phone app in real time." I asked him if he could just throw it away. He looked at me carefully and then shook his head. "If someone put this on your car, this is evidence," he said. "You call the police, you keep it intact, you let them handle it." He was right. I called the non-emergency line and explained the situation. The officer who took my call told me to leave the tracker in a secure location and to come to the station the next morning to file a report. Dale said he'd lock it in a metal parts cabinet inside his service bay overnight, and that no one else had access to the garage after hours. I drove home. I didn't sleep much. The next morning I got a call from Dale before I had even finished my coffee. His voice was different, tighter. "Rachel, you need to come by the shop, and you need to bring the police report information with you." I asked him what was wrong. "Something happened last night," he said. "I want you to see it." When I got to the garage, Dale led me into his small back office and turned his computer monitor toward me. He had 4 security cameras mounted on the exterior of the building, and he had pulled up the recorded footage from the previous night. The first clip started at 11:14. A black SUV pulled slowly into the small lot in front of the garage, tinted windows. It circled once, drove out, and returned 4 minutes later. This time, it parked across the street, about 50 yards from the building. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. The camera resolution wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. He walked toward the garage, stopped at the edge of the parking lot, and stood there for a long time, looking at the closed service bay doors. Then he pulled out a phone and stared at the screen for several minutes. Dale scrubbed forward. At 12:47, the SUV came back. Same slow pass. This time the man got out again and walked all the way up to the service bay door. He tried the handle. It didn't move. He walked around the side of the building. Dale had cameras there too. The man tested a side door, looked up at the windows, and then walked back to the SUV and drove away. At 2:19, the SUV came back one more time. It parked across the street again. The man didn't get out. He just sat there for almost 40 minutes, phone in his lap, occasionally lifting his head to look at the building. Then he drove away, and he didn't come back. Dale looked at me. "He was tracking that little box," he said. "Whatever app he uses, it told him the tracker had stopped moving here. He came back 3 times because he couldn't figure out why your car wasn't leaving." I stared at the frozen image on the screen. The man's face was partially shadowed by the cap, but there was enough of his jawline and nose and the shape of his shoulders that something clicked in my memory. I asked Dale to zoom in on the clearest shot he had, one where the man had turned his head slightly toward one of the exterior lights. It was Brian, the man I had met for coffee, the man I had politely declined a second date with, the man I had, by then, almost completely forgotten. I sat in Dale's office for a long time, trying to process it. During our single date, I had left him alone at the table for maybe 2 minutes to use the restroom. I remembered because I had felt slightly rude leaving so early into the conversation. 2 minutes. That was all it would have taken for him to walk out to the parking lot, find my car, he had watched me arrive, and stick a magnetic tracker to the frame. Then he could walk back inside and sit down before I returned from the bathroom, and I would never know. He had been watching me for months before I noticed him. I took the security footage to the police that same day. The officer who had originally spoken to me passed the case up to a detective, and things moved from there. The tracker was a specific brand with a serial number that could be traced back to the account that had purchased it. The account was in Brian's name, connected to his credit card, his email address, and his home address. Between the tracker, the security footage, and the photographs I had taken of the SUV at multiple locations over the previous weeks, the evidence was clear. They arrested him at his apartment 2 days later. When they searched his home, they found a laptop with the tracking app still open on the screen. They also found a printed spreadsheet where he had been logging my locations, my arrival times, my departure times, and small notes about what I was wearing or who I was with. He had been doing it methodically, not obsessively, not in some frenzied handwriting, but in the calm, orderly way you might update a work document. The legal process took almost a year. He was charged with stalking, illegal use of a tracking device, and a few other things I don't fully remember. He accepted a plea deal that included probation, mandatory counseling, and a long-term restraining order. He never went to prison for it. I've made peace with that, more or less. The system does what it does. I sold that car. I couldn't drive it anymore. Every time I got in, I found myself thinking about the little black box that had been stuck under the frame for months, quietly sending my location to someone I had shared 1 cup of coffee with. The thing I keep coming back to, though, isn't the tracker itself. It's the realization that came later, once I had time to sit with what happened. He never followed me. Not once, in all those months, did he tail my car down a highway, or hang back at a stoplight, or try to keep me in sight. He didn't need to. He could let me get well ahead of him, watch a small dot move across a map, and take a different route after it stopped. If I stayed inside a store or restaurant for a while, he had plenty of time to arrive and settle into a nearby space before I came back out. Every time I looked in my rearview mirror and saw nothing, I felt safe. I was so focused on what might be behind me that I never once considered that someone might be waiting ahead. That's the part that still bothers me. Not the man, not the tracker, not the year in court. It's the fact that for months I thought I was alone every single time I arrived somewhere. And I wasn't. Story 3. Someone was checking my apartment. I moved into the building in March. It was a renovated 4-story complex in the Reno district of Denver, one of those older brick buildings that had been gutted and rebuilt on the inside with modern finishes, smart locks, and a controlled entry system that required a key fob to access the main doors, the elevator, and the individual floors. The management company had marketed it heavily to remote workers. High-speed internet included in the rent, soundproofed walls, a small co-working lounge on the ground floor. I signed the lease within a week of touring the place. I was 27 at the time, working full-time in customer support for a software company based in Austin. I had never met my coworkers in person. My entire job happened through a headset and a screen, which meant I spent most of my waking hours inside my apartment. I worked from 9 to 5 Mountain Time, with a lunch break at noon and a second short break around 3. Outside of work, I went to a yoga studio 2 blocks away, shopped at the King Soopers on Larimer, and occasionally met friends for drinks in Lodo. My life was quiet. I liked it that way. My apartment was on the 3rd floor, Unit 312, It was a one-bedroom with an open kitchen, a small living area, and a bedroom just large enough for a queen bed and a narrow closet. The unit directly beside mine, 314, was vacant. There was a small sign on the door that said, "Renovation in progress," and I occasionally heard construction noise during the day, drilling, hammering, the sound of drywall being cut. The management company told me the unit was being updated to match the newer finishes in the rest of the building and that it should be finished within a few months. I didn't mind the noise. It stopped by 5 o'clock every day, which was when my shift ended anyway. The first thing I noticed was the kitchen cabinet. It was a Tuesday, about 3 weeks after I moved in. I had come home from yoga around 7 in the evening, and when I walked into the kitchen to fill my water bottle, I saw that the cabinet above the sink was open about 2 inches, not wide, just slightly ajar, the way a cabinet might sit if the latch hadn't fully caught when you closed it. I closed it without thinking. I assumed I had bumped it that morning when I was reaching for a glass and hadn't pushed it shut all the way. 2 days later, I noticed the bathroom sink. I had used the sink before logging on that morning. At lunch, I walked to a cafe down the street to break up the monotony of sitting at my desk. When I returned to the apartment, I went into the bathroom to wash my hands. The porcelain around the drain was wet, not flooded, just damp, the way it looks when someone has recently run the faucet and the water hasn't fully evaporated. I touched it. It was cool but not cold. I stood there for a moment, trying to remember whether I had used the sink that morning. I couldn't remember. I told myself I probably had and just hadn't wiped it down. The third thing was the desk chair. I work at a small desk in the corner of my living room. The chair is a basic rolling office chair, the kind with a mesh back and armrests. I always push it under the desk when I'm done for the day because the living room is small and I don't like tripping over it. One evening, I came out of the bedroom after a shower and saw that the chair was pulled out from the desk and angled slightly toward the window. Not dramatically, just enough that if I had sat down in it, I would have been facing the street instead of my monitor. I stared at it for a long time. I told myself I had done it. I told myself I had moved the chair during a phone call or while pacing during a long hold with a client and simply forgotten. The human brain is very good at constructing explanations for small anomalies, and I let mine do its work. I pushed the chair back under the desk and didn't think about it again. But the feeling started. It's hard to describe. It wasn't fear exactly, it was more like a low hum of wrongness, the kind you get when you walk into a room and can't immediately identify what's different, but you know something is. My apartment felt slightly off in the evenings, the way a song sounds wrong when one instrument is a half step out of tune. Nothing was broken, nothing was missing, but the space didn't feel entirely mine anymore. I started documenting things. I'm a detail-oriented person by nature. It comes with the job. So I began taking photographs of my apartment before I left for yoga, errands, or lunch, and sometimes again before bed. The kitchen counters, the bathroom sink, the bedroom door, the position of the desk chair, the closet door. I stored the photos in a folder on my phone labeled APT and compared them when I got home. For the first week, everything matched. I started to relax. I told myself the earlier incidents had been exactly what I thought they were, small lapses in memory caused by a monotonous routine. Then, on a Thursday, I came home and found the bedroom drawer open. It was the top drawer of my nightstand, the one where I kept chargers, lip balm, and a small bottle of melatonin. The drawer was pulled out about an inch, not enough to see inside unless you were looking directly down at it. I compared the photo I had taken that morning. In the photo, The drawer was flush with the nightstand. I was sure of it. I zoomed in. Flush. I checked the front door. The smart lock showed no entry logs other than my own fob that morning and that evening. I checked the windows. All locked. I checked the deadbolt. Engaged. There was no sign that anyone had been inside. I called building management the next morning. The property manager, a woman named Lisa, was polite and professional. She pulled the access logs from my floor and confirmed that there had been no unrecognized entries beyond me and the scheduled construction crew. The main doors and service access were logged as well. No activity outside, approved work hours. No maintenance entry tied to my unit. Sometimes older buildings settle, Lisa said. Drawers can shift, cabinet latches can loosen. It's not uncommon in the first few months after a renovation. I accepted the explanation because I wanted to accept it. I changed the lock on my front door anyway, paying for a new smart lock out of my own pocket. Lisa seemed slightly offended, but processed the request without argument. The disturbances continued. A kitchen towel moved from the hook to the counter. The bathroom mirror had a faint smudge near the bottom corner that I hadn't left. My desk lamp was tilted at a different angle. Each change was small enough to question, large enough to notice. I kept photographing. I kept comparing. The discrepancies were real. I wasn't imagining them. The worst part was the silence. There was no sound of a break-in, no shattered glass, no forced lock, no muddy footprints. Whoever was doing this was entering my apartment without leaving a trace, and the building's security system, which I had specifically chosen this building for, was telling me that no one was coming through the front door. Then the sound started. I worked late one night in early May. I had a West Coast client meeting that ran until 9, and after the call ended, I stayed at my desk to finish some documentation. The building was quiet. Most of the construction noise in Unit 314 had stopped for the day hours earlier. The hallway was silent. The only sound was the hum of my laptop fan and the distant murmur of traffic on the street below. Around 10 o'clock, I heard something in the wall. It was faint. A soft, rhythmic scraping, like fingernails dragging across drywall. It seemed to come from the direction of my bedroom, which shared a wall with the vacant unit next door. I sat very still and listened. The sound lasted maybe 15 seconds, then stopped. I waited 5 minutes. It didn't come back. I told myself it was the building settling. Lisa had said that. Old brick, new construction, materials expanding and contracting with the temperature. I repeated the explanation to myself like a mantra and went to bed. The sound came back 2 nights later. Same time, same wall, same faint scraping, followed by a dull thud that I felt more than heard, like something heavy being set down on the other side of the drywall. This time, it lasted longer, maybe 30 seconds. And when it stopped, I noticed that my bedroom closet door was open about an inch. I had closed it before bed. I was certain. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, my phone in my hand, listening to the walls. Nothing. The building was completely silent. I asked my friend Jess to stay over that weekend. Jess is a nurse, practical and unflappable, and I needed someone else in the apartment to confirm that I wasn't losing my mind. She brought takeout and a bottle of wine, and we sat in the living room until midnight, talking and laughing. I told her about the disturbances, and she listened without judgment, though I could tell she thought I was stressed from work and reading too much into normal apartment quirks. Nothing happened that night. The walls were quiet. The closet stayed closed. Every object in the apartment remained exactly where we had left it. Jess left the next morning around 10, and I walked her to the elevator and went back inside. I locked the door behind her. I turned around, and I saw that the bedroom closet door was standing wide open. Not an inch, not a crack, wide open. Both sliding panels pushed fully to the sides, exposing the entire interior of the closet, my hanging clothes, my shoe rack, the storage bins on the upper shelf. The closet had been closed when Jess left. I had watched her walk past it on her way to the front door. I had been standing in the hallway the entire time. My hands started shaking. I pulled out my phone and took a photograph. Then I backed out of the bedroom, closed the apartment door behind me, and went downstairs to the management office. Lisa listened to my account and pulled the access logs again. Nothing. No one had entered the third-floor hallway. No one had used the elevator between 9:30 and 10:15. The main door showed only Jess's temporary guest fob and my own. According to every piece of data the building could provide, no one had been near my apartment. I asked Lisa about the vacant unit next door. She told me the renovation was still ongoing and that a small crew of contractors came and went during business hours. She showed me the access logs for Unit 314. The contractors had entered at 7 that morning and left at 3 that afternoon. No activity after that. I went back to my apartment and sat in the living room for a long time. I looked at the bedroom door. I looked at the closet. I thought about the scraping in the wall. I thought about the damp sink, the open drawer, the angled chair, and I realized that if no one was coming through the front door, and no one was coming through the windows, and no one was coming through the hallway, then whoever was entering my apartment was coming from somewhere else. I bought a camera that afternoon. It was a small, motion-activated device, the kind you can buy at any electronics store for about $40. It records in short clips when it detects movement and stores the footage on a micro SD card. I set it up on my dresser, angled toward the closet, and made sure the lens had a clear view of both sliding panels. I left the closet doors slightly open so the camera could see the back wall of the closet. Then I left the apartment. I went to Jess's place and stayed there for the day. I told her I needed to run an errand, which wasn't entirely a lie. The errand was waiting. I came back at 6 in the evening. The apartment looked normal. The closet doors hadn't moved. I went to the bedroom, picked up the camera, and pulled out the SD card. I plugged it into my laptop and opened the footage. The first several clips were nothing. Shadows shifting as the sun moved across the room. The curtain stirring slightly from the air vent. Normal apartment movement. Then, at 4:17 in the afternoon, the camera triggered. I watched the clip 3 times before I fully understood what I was seeing. The back wall of the closet moved, not the whole wall, a section of it, a rectangular panel about 3 feet wide and 4 feet tall, set into the drywall at the rear of the closet behind my hanging clothes. The panel pushed inward, then slid to the left, revealing a dark opening behind it. A hand appeared in the gap, then an arm, then a man's head and shoulders, emerging from the darkness into the dim light of my closet. He was wearing a gray t-shirt and a dust mask pulled down around his neck. He had dark hair and a short beard. He looked around the closet carefully, pushing my clothes aside with one hand. He reached toward the upper shelf and moved one of the storage bins. He seemed to be looking for something specific. Then he turned his head and saw the camera. He froze. His eyes locked directly on the lens. For about 3 seconds, he didn't move at all. Then he pulled back quickly, sliding the panel shut behind him. The clip ended. I didn't go back into that apartment alone. I called the police from Jess's living room. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes, and I showed them the footage on my laptop. One of the officers, a woman named Tran, watched the clip twice and then asked me to wait in the patrol car while they entered the building with the on-site security guard. They went to Unit 314 first. The door was unlocked. The renovation was about halfway finished. New drywall on some walls, exposed framing on others, construction debris piled in the corners. Officer Tran found the access point within 10 minutes. Behind a section of unfinished drywall in the bedroom of Unit 314, there was a narrow maintenance corridor that had been left open during the original construction of the building. It ran between the 2 units, connecting the plumbing and electrical infrastructure. The corridor was just wide enough for a person to walk through sideways. At the end nearest my apartment, someone had cut a clean rectangular opening in the back wall of my closet and fitted it with a removable panel held in place by small magnets. The contractor had been walking through the walls. When they searched the maintenance space and the contractor's work area in Unit 314, they found more than the access point. They found a small plastic bag containing items from my apartment, a hair tie, a tube of lip balm, a receipt from the King Soopers on Larimer that I had thrown away weeks earlier. They found a folded piece of paper with my work schedule written on it, including the days I worked late and the days I left for yoga. They found a phone charger that matched the one I kept in my nightstand drawer, and they found a handwritten note tucked into the pocket of a work jacket hanging on a nail in the unfinished unit that simply said, Unit 312, alone most days. The contractor's name was Derek. He was 31 years old, employed by the subcontracting firm handling the renovations in the building. He had a key to Unit 314 and unrestricted access to the 3rd floor during construction hours. Investigators believed that on several evenings, he remained inside the unfinished unit after the rest of the crew left. He had discovered the maintenance corridor during the first week of renovation work and realized it connected to the occupied unit next door. He had cut the access panel in mid-March, about 2 weeks before I first noticed the open cabinet. He was arrested at his home the following morning. The charges included burglary, unlawful entry, and stalking. The legal process was complicated because his attorney tried to separate his authorized access to the unfinished unit from his repeated entry into my private residence. The camera footage, stolen property, and altered closet panel made that distinction impossible to sustain, but the argument still slowed the case. I terminated my lease immediately. The management company waived the early termination fee, which was the least they could do. I moved into a corner apartment in a different building across town, one with fewer shared walls and no active renovation projects. I still check the back of every closet I walk into. I still push furniture against walls that feel too thin. The police were thorough in their investigation, and they were honest with me about what they found and what they couldn't determine. They could confirm that Derek had entered my apartment at least a dozen times during the weeks I had been documenting the disturbances. The camera footage, the stolen items, and the schedule notes all supported that timeline. But they couldn't tell me how many times he had entered before I started noticing. The access panel showed signs of wear that suggested it had been opened and closed many more times than the documented incidents. The maintenance corridor had footprints in the dust that had been partially swept away, as if someone had tried to clean up after themselves. And the schedule notes in his jacket included details about my routine from the very first week I lived in the building, before any of the small disturbances I had noticed. I try not to think about those early weeks. I try not to think about the mornings I woke up and walked through my apartment believing I had been alone all night. I try not to think about the evenings I sat at my desk with my back to the bedroom, wearing headphones, completely absorbed in a customer call, while the wall behind my closet was quietly sliding open. But I do think about it more than I want to, because the truth is, the apartment felt wrong from the very beginning. And I ignored it. I explained it away. I told myself that old buildings settle and cabinet latches loosen and desk chairs roll on uneven floors. I gave every rational explanation I could find because the alternative was too unsettling to accept. And while I was explaining it away, he was already inside. Story 4. My private calendar wasn't private. When you go through a divorce, you learn very quickly that your life is no longer private. Your finances become public record. Your living arrangements become a negotiation. Your emotional state becomes something your coworkers comment on in the break room with that particular tilt of the head that means they're trying to be kind, but are also deeply curious. You stop sharing details, you stop volunteering information, you build walls around the small, ordinary facts of your daily existence because you've learned that anything you say can be repeated, misinterpreted, or used in ways you didn't anticipate. I thought I'd gotten very good at that. I was wrong. My name is Lauren, I'm 36 years old, and at the time this happened, I had been divorced for about 8 months. I work in marketing for a mid-sized company in Atlanta, the kind of firm that handles brand strategy for regional clients, restaurant chains, healthcare networks, real estate developers. My title is Director of Campaign Strategy, which sounds more impressive than it is. Mostly it means I spend my days in meetings, managing timelines, and trying to keep 12 different projects from collapsing at the same time. The divorce was difficult, but not dramatic. My ex-husband Kevin and I had grown apart over several years, and by the time we filed, we were more roommates than partners. We split the assets, sold the house in Decatur, and agreed to minimal contact going forward. He moved to Savannah for a new job. I rented a small condo in Midtown and started the slow process of rebuilding a life that felt like it belonged only to me. Part of that rebuilding involved therapy. I started seeing a counselor named Dr. Whitfield once a week on Thursday evenings at 6. I also started looking for a new apartment, something larger than the condo, with a real kitchen and maybe a small balcony. I had viewings scheduled on weekends. I had dinner plans with friends I hadn't seen in months. I had a life that was slowly, carefully coming back together. All of this was on my calendar. The first message came on a Wednesday in October. I was at my desk reviewing a campaign brief for a client meeting the next morning when a text arrived from an unknown number. It was short. "Hope the lunch at Echo goes well. You deserve a good meal after this week." I stared at it. Echo is a restaurant in Midtown, and I did have a lunch meeting scheduled there the next day with the client's marketing team. But I hadn't told anyone outside of work about that lunch, and the people at work who knew about it wouldn't text me from an unknown number. The tone was friendly, almost warm, but the fact that a stranger knew the name of the restaurant and the general shape of my week made my stomach tighten. I didn't respond. I blocked the number and went back to work. The second message came 5 days later, on a Monday evening. "Thursdays must be hard. I hope Dr. Whitfield is helping." I stopped breathing. I read the message 3 times. Dr. Whitfield, my therapist's name, my Thursday evening sessions. I had told exactly 4 people about my therapy: my mother, my best friend Claire, my divorce attorney during the settlement process, and Kevin, because we had briefly discussed couples counseling before deciding to separate. That was it. I had never posted about it. I had never mentioned it at work. I had never written it down anywhere except my personal calendar. My first thought was Kevin. It made sense. He was the only person on that short list who had a reason to be upset with me, who might want to unsettle me, who knew the details of my post-divorce life from the months of separation negotiations. I called him that night. He answered on the second ring, sounding tired and confused. "Lauren, I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "I haven't texted you in 3 weeks. The last thing I sent was about the tax documents." I pushed back. I told him about the messages, the restaurant, the therapist's name. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said something that surprised me. "I'm in Savannah right now. I've been here all week. I can send you a photo of my office if you want. Or you can call my manager. I'm not doing this, Lauren. I promise you." I wanted to believe him, and I mostly did. Kevin had his faults, but he wasn't cruel, and he wasn't the type to play games. He sent me a screenshot of his work calendar for the week, which showed him in back-to-back meetings at his new office from 8 to 5 every day. It did not prove he was innocent, but it was enough to weaken my certainty. I blocked the second number and tried to move on. The third message broke something in me. It arrived on a Saturday morning while I was driving to an apartment viewing in Virginia Highland. I was stopped at a red light on Ponce de Leon when my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I glanced at it. "The place on Highland looks nice, but check the water pressure. You don't want to end up with another bad shower situation." The apartment on Highland. I had booked that viewing 2 days earlier through a real estate app on my phone. I had added it to my calendar as Apartment Highland, 10 a.m., with a private note reminding myself to check the water pressure because of the shower in the old Decatur house. I hadn't told anyone. I hadn't posted about it. I hadn't even mentioned it to Claire because I wanted to surprise her if I actually found a place I liked. The light turned green. I drove through the intersection with my hands gripping the wheels so tightly my knuckles ached. I pulled into the apartment complex's parking lot, sat in my car, and cried for about 5 minutes. Not from sadness, from the specific, suffocating feeling of being watched by someone you cannot see. Someone knew where I was going on a Saturday morning. Someone knew the address of an apartment I had only recently scheduled a viewing for, and someone had referenced a detail about my old house. The shower in the master bathroom had terrible water pressure, something Kevin and I had complained about for years. I had forgotten that I had typed the same reminder into the calendar description, so the message felt like proof that the sender knew my private history. I went back to Kevin. I know I said I believed him, but the shower detail shook me. I called him again and asked him directly if he had shared any information about me with anyone. He was firm. He hadn't. He suggested I check my phone for spyware, which I did. I took it to an Apple store the following Monday and had a technician run diagnostics. The phone was clean. No unauthorized apps, no suspicious profiles, no jailbreak indicators. The messages kept coming. "Hope the presentation went well. You always crush those Q4 reviews. Don't forget your dentist appointment on the 14th. You skipped last time. That new Italian place on Peachtree is overrated. Try the one on Roswell instead." Each message referenced something specific, something from my calendar, something I had entered within the past few days, sometimes within the past few hours. The Q4 review was a work event I had added to my calendar the previous week. The dentist appointment was a personal reminder I had set on a Sunday evening. The Italian restaurant was a dinner reservation I had made through an app on my phone that same morning. The timing was what finally made me stop looking outward and start looking inward. One afternoon in late November, I was sitting in a conference room after a team meeting, adding a last-minute appointment to my calendar. It was a follow-up call with a vendor scheduled for the next day at 2 o'clock. I typed the details into my phone, vendor name, time, Zoom link, and saved the entry. Less than 90 seconds later, my phone buzzed. "Good luck with the vendor call tomorrow. Don't let them talk you into the premium package." 90 seconds. I hadn't spoken the details aloud. No one was in the room with me. The information existed nowhere except inside my calendar app, which was synced to my company email account, and someone had read it, processed it, and sent me a message about it in under 2 minutes. That was the moment I stopped thinking about Kevin and started thinking about work. I went to our IT department the next morning. I explained the situation to a security analyst named Priya, who listened carefully and asked me to leave my laptop with her for a few hours. She said she would run an audit on my company account, specifically looking at calendar permissions, delegate access, and any third-party integrations that might be pulling data from my schedule. I went back to my desk and tried to work. Around noon, a coworker named Ethan stopped by. Ethan was a project manager on the digital team. He was a few years younger than me, quiet, competent, and generally well-liked. He had been one of the people who checked in on me during the divorce, bringing me coffee in the mornings and asking how I was doing without being intrusive about it. I considered him a work friend, the kind of person you trust enough to vent to during a bad day, but don't necessarily see outside the office. "Hey, you okay?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "You look stressed." I gave him a vague answer. He nodded sympathetically and said, "If you need anything, you know where I am." Then he walked back to his desk. Priya called me at 3 o'clock. Her voice was different from our earlier conversation. More careful, more deliberate. "Lauren, I need you to come back down here, and I'd like to loop in HR." I walked to the IT office with a knot in my stomach. Priya had her laptop open on the conference table, and an HR representative named David was sitting beside her with a notepad. "We found something," Priya said. "About 4 months ago, the company migrated from our old scheduling platform to a new one. Do you remember that?" I did. It had been a messy transition over the summer. Calendars had to be transferred, permissions had to be reassigned, and the IT team had asked several employees to help test the new system before the full rollout. During the migration, delegate permissions were carried over from the old platform to the new one, Priya continued. Delegate access allows another user to view your calendar events, including titles, locations, descriptions, and any updates you make in real time. It's typically used for executive assistants or team leads who need to coordinate schedules. She turned her laptop toward me. On the screen was a permissions table for my calendar account. Most of the entries were standard: my own access, the shared team calendar, the conference room booking system. But at the bottom of the list, under a column labeled Delegate Full Visibility, was a name. Ethan. I stared at it. During the migration testing, Ethan was assigned temporary delegate access to several calendars, including yours, to verify that events were transferring correctly, Priya said. The temporary access was supposed to be revoked after the migration was complete. It wasn't. The permission carried over to the new platform and has been active ever since. She paused. He can see everything, Lauren. Every event title, every location, every description field. Every time you add, edit, or delete an entry, he receives a notification. He's had this access for 4 months. The room went very quiet. I could hear the hum of the server rack in the corner and the distant sound of someone laughing in the hallway. I thought about the messages, the restaurant, the therapist, the apartment, the vendor call, the dentist, the Italian dinner. All of it was on my calendar. Even the comment about the old shower had come from the private note attached to the apartment viewing. All of it had been visible to Ethan since July. I thought about the coffee he brought me in the mornings, the way he asked how I was doing, the sympathetic tilt of his head when I mentioned having a rough week. He hadn't been guessing. He had been reading my life in real time, watching my appointments populate one by one, and then performing concern based on information I never chose to share with him. David from HR asked me if I wanted to confront him. I said no. I didn't want to be in the same room as him. I didn't want to see his face when he realized he'd been caught. I wanted evidence. Priya and David came up with a plan. That evening, I created a new calendar entry for the following Friday at 7 o'clock. I titled it Dinner Solo and added a specific location, a restaurant in Buckhead called Marcel, with a reservation note in the description field. The reservation didn't exist. I had never been to Marcel. I chose it because it was a real restaurant with a visible outdoor patio that would be easy to monitor. I told no one about the plan except Priya, David, and a private security firm the company hired to document the outcome. On Friday evening, I sat in a car across the street from Marcel with Priya and one of the security consultants. At 6:45, a silver Honda pulled into the restaurant's parking lot. Ethan got out. He was wearing a button-down shirt and dark jeans, dressed more carefully than he usually dressed for work. He walked to the host stand, spoke to the hostess for a moment, and then took a seat at a table near the patio entrance. He placed his phone on the table and began checking it periodically, glancing toward the street every few minutes. He waited for almost an hour. At 7:40, when it became clear I wasn't coming, he stood up, looked confused, and walked back to his car. The security consultant photographed the entire sequence. Priya recorded the timestamp on her phone to match against the calendar entry I had created. The following Monday, Ethan was called into an HR meeting. I was not present, but David walked me through what happened afterward. Ethan initially denied any wrongdoing, claiming the delegate access was a technical error he hadn't noticed. When Priya presented the access log showing that he had opened my calendar an average of 14 times per day over the past 4 months, his story changed. He admitted to reading the entries, but claimed he had never intended to use the information to contact me. When David showed him screenshots of the text messages and the documentation from the restaurant, he stopped talking and asked for a lawyer. He was terminated that afternoon. The company filed a formal report with the Atlanta Police Department. Investigators later used carrier records and evidence recovered during the case to connect the prepaid number to him, and prosecutors pursued stalking and computer access charges. The legal process took several months. He ultimately received probation, a restraining order, and a requirement to complete a mandated intervention program. He was also ordered to stay away from me and the company premises indefinitely. The aftermath was harder than I expected. I stayed at the company for another 6 months before transferring to a different office in Charlotte. I couldn't sit at my desk without thinking about the fact that every meeting I scheduled, every doctor's appointment I logged, every dinner plan I typed into my phone had been visible to someone sitting 3 rows behind me. I couldn't walk past his old desk without seeing the empty chair and imagining him glancing at his screen, reading my Thursday evening therapy session, knowing exactly where I would be and when. The most disturbing part wasn't the messages themselves. It was the realization that Ethan had positioned himself as my support system during the entire ordeal. When I mentioned feeling stressed, he already knew why, because he had read the appointment I'd added that morning. When he brought me coffee after a difficult week, he already knew the week had been difficult because my calendar was full of back-to-back meetings and a dentist appointment I had tried to reschedule twice. His kindness wasn't spontaneous. It was informed. He was using my private schedule to perform empathy, to insert himself into my life as the person who understood me best, while I had no idea he was reading every detail of my days. I still use a digital calendar. I have to. It's how my job works. But I've changed the way I write in it. I don't use specific addresses anymore. I don't include the names of doctors or therapists or restaurants. My entries are vague now, deliberately vague. Personal appointment PM. Aaron North. Meeting external. I know it makes my schedule harder to read for the people who legitimately need to coordinate with me, and I know it probably frustrates my assistant, but I can't bring myself to type the real details. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, I know that permissions are fragile things. They're granted during migrations, carried over during updates, forgotten during transitions, and the person who can read your life doesn't need to break in. They just need to wait for someone to leave a door open. And someone always leaves a door open. Story 5. I found the room where he watched me. The photograph was still damp when I found it. It was a Thursday evening in November, and I was walking through the third level of the parking garage on Southwest Broadway, heading toward my car after a late session in the lab. The garage was mostly empty. The overhead lights buzzed with that particular fluorescent hum that makes concrete structures feel like they're breathing. My footsteps echoed off the walls. I was tired, thinking about the data I still needed to process and the paper I was supposed to start drafting over the weekend. I reached my car, a 10-year-old Civic with a dent in the rear bumper and a faded environmental science bumper sticker on the back window, and stopped. There was a photograph tucked under the driver's side windshield wiper. It was a standard 4x6 print, the kind you get from a drugstore kiosk or a home printer. The image showed a woman walking through a glass door into a parking garage. She was wearing a green rain jacket and carrying a canvas tote bag over one shoulder. Her head was turned slightly to the left, looking at something off-frame. The woman was me. I recognized the jacket immediately. I was wearing it that night. I recognized the tote bag. I recognized the glass door in the background. It was the pedestrian entrance to the same parking garage I was standing in. The photograph had been taken from across the street, probably from the sidewalk near the bus stop, at an angle that captured me in profile as I entered the building. Based on the lighting and the position of the shadows, it had been taken less than an hour earlier. I pulled the photograph from the wiper and looked around the garage. Level 3 was empty, except for my car and a silver pickup truck parked near the stairwell. I checked the stairwell door. Closed. I checked the ramp leading to level 2. Nothing. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, holding the damp photograph, listening to the hum of the lights and the distant sound of traffic on the street below. Then I got in my car, locked the doors, and drove home. My name is Nora. I was 25 at the time, in my second year of a master's program in environmental science at a university in Portland, Oregon. My research focused on watershed contamination in the Columbia River Basin, which meant I spent most of my time either in a laboratory on the north side of campus or at field sites along the river. I lived in a small apartment about a 10-minute bus ride from the university. I had one close friend in the program, a woman named Sam, and a handful of acquaintances in my department. I kept a low profile. I didn't use social media much. I didn't date. I was focused on my thesis and my funding and the overwhelming, exhausting process of trying to prove I belonged in a program that sometimes made me feel like I didn't. I told Sam about the photograph the next morning. We were sitting in the graduate student lounge, drinking bad coffee from the department machine, and I showed her the print. She studied it carefully and then asked the question I had been turning over in my head all night. "Are you sure it's recent?" I told her about the jacket, the tote bag, the lighting. She frowned and said, "Maybe someone from the department had taken it for a project or a newsletter and left it on my car by mistake." It was a stretch, and we both knew it, but it was more comfortable than the alternative. The second photograph appeared 3 days later. I found it in my mailbox at the apartment building. It was in a plain white envelope with no return address and no postage, which meant someone had hand-delivered it. The photograph inside showed me sitting at a table in a cafe near campus, reading a textbook with a cup of coffee in front of me. The angle was different from the first photograph. This one was taken from inside the cafe, from a table about 3 rows behind me. I was in the foreground, slightly out of focus, and the photographer had captured the back of my head and my left shoulder. I had been to that cafe twice in the past month. I couldn't remember which visit the photograph was from, but the sweater I was wearing in the image was one I wore frequently, so it could have been either. The third photograph appeared the following week, taped to the glass door of the laboratory building where I worked. This one showed me entering the building from the outside, captured from a distance of maybe 50 yards. I was walking up the concrete steps with my backpack on and my keys in my hand. The angle was elevated, as if the photographer had been standing on a nearby overpass or a second-floor balcony across the street. The image was sharper than the first two, taken with a better lens or a steadier hand. 3 photographs, 3 different locations, 3 different angles, 3 different distances. That was the detail that started to frighten me in a way the first photograph hadn't. The parking garage shot had been taken from street level, across the road. The cafe shot had been taken from inside the building, close range. The laboratory shot had been taken from an elevated position at a significant distance. The lighting conditions were different. The focal lengths were different. The composition suggested different vantage points, different equipment, and possibly different times of day. I started to believe that more than one person was watching me. I went to campus security that Friday. I brought all 3 photographs and laid them out on the desk of an officer named Reyes, a calm, middle-aged man who had worked at the university for over a decade. He examined each photograph carefully, asked me about the locations and times, and took notes in a small, spiral-bound notebook. "We'll look into it," he said. "But I want to be up front with you. These were taken in public spaces, from public vantage points. There's no law against photographing someone in a public area. What we're looking for is a pattern of behavior that crosses into harassment or stalking." I understood. I also understood that his job was to manage expectations, not to dismiss me. He took copies of the photographs and promised to review the security camera footage from the areas where they had been taken. A week passed. Reyes called me to say that the camera footage from the cafe and the laboratory entrance had been reviewed, but the angles of the university's cameras didn't cover the vantage points the photographer had used. The cafe's interior cameras faced the register and the entrance, not the seating area. The laboratory's exterior cameras covered the main doors, but not the overpass across the street. There were no clear images of anyone taking photographs. More photographs arrived, one in my department mailbox, showing me walking through the campus quad in the rain. One slipped under my apartment door, showing me buying groceries at the Fred Meyer on Burnside. One left on the hood of my car in the parking garage, showing me sitting by the window in the graduate student lounge, talking to Sam. Each image came from a different direction, a different distance, a different apparent observer. The grocery store shot was taken from the parking lot, through the plate glass window. The lounge shot was taken from the hallway outside, through the glass partition. The quad shot was taken from a second-story window in an adjacent building. I was becoming convinced that I was dealing with a group. The logistics seemed impossible for a single person. The photographer would have needed to be at the cafe and the parking garage and the laboratory and the grocery store and the quad, sometimes within the same day, using different approaches and different equipment each time. I imagined a network of people, coordinating through messages, taking shifts, passing photographs to whoever was responsible for printing and delivering them. The idea was terrifying, but it was the only explanation that fit the evidence. Sam told me I was spiraling. She said it gently, the way you talk to someone you care about who is losing sleep and skipping meals and checking the locks on every door 3 times before bed. She was right that I was spiraling, but I wasn't wrong about the photographs. I started documenting everything. I created a spreadsheet on my laptop with columns for date, location, angle, distance, estimated time of capture, and any identifying details in the background. I pinned the photographs to a corkboard in my bedroom and connected them with colored thread, the way you see detectives do in television shows. I felt ridiculous doing it, but I also felt like I was finally taking control of something that had been controlling me for weeks. And that's when I noticed the clues. They were small, almost invisible unless you were looking for them. In the background of the parking garage photograph, reflected in the glass door behind me, there was a faint shape that could have been a person holding a phone or a camera. In the cafe photograph, on the table behind the photographer's position, there was a distinctive red water bottle with a black carabiner clipped to the lid. In the laboratory photograph, on the overpass railing in the lower corner of the frame, there was a dark jacket draped over the metal bar, the kind of lightweight windbreaker that cyclists wear. I went through every photograph on the corkboard and looked for recurring details. The red water bottle appeared in 3 of the 7 images, always in the background, always near the photographer's apparent position. The dark windbreaker appeared in 2. A specific pair of gray sneakers appeared in one shot where the photographer's feet were accidentally captured in the lower edge of the frame. The same person was taking all of the photographs. He was changing his appearance, different jackets, different hats, different bags. He was using different modes of transportation. I noticed a bicycle in the background of one shot and a bus pass lanyard in another. He was varying his distances and angles deliberately, making each photograph look like it came from a different observer. But the red water bottle, the gray sneakers, the windbreaker, they were consistent. He was one person, and he was being very careful to look like several. I brought my findings to Reyes. He was impressed by the documentation, though I could tell he was also concerned about the level of detail I had accumulated. He said he would increase patrols around the laboratory and the parking garage, and asked me to call him immediately if I saw anyone taking photographs of me. I saw him 9 days later. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early December. I was leaving the laboratory after a long session with water samples, carrying my backpack and a stack of printed data tables. The sun was setting early, and the campus was dim, the pathways lit by the amber glow of the lampposts. I walked down the concrete steps toward the main quad and stopped at the bottom to dig my bus pass out of my jacket pocket. That's when I saw him. He was standing near a bike rack about 40 yards away, partially hidden behind a row of parked bicycles. He was wearing a dark hoodie and a beanie, and he was holding a camera, a real one, not a phone, a mirrorless camera with a long lens, pointed directly at me. He was adjusting the focus ring with his left hand. His right hand was braced against the bike rack for stability. I froze. He hadn't seen me notice him yet. I had maybe 5 seconds before he looked up from the viewfinder. I pulled out my phone and called Reyes. I kept my voice low and described exactly where I was and where the man was standing. Reyes told me to stay where I was and not to approach. He said campus security was 2 minutes away. But the man must have sensed something. He lowered the camera, looked in my direction, and saw me staring at him with my phone pressed to my ear. His expression didn't change. There was no panic, no guilt, no surprise. He simply turned, slung the camera around his neck, and started walking quickly toward the edge of the quad. A campus security vehicle pulled up within 90 seconds. 2 officers got out, and I pointed toward the man, who was now crossing the street at a fast pace, heading toward a row of townhouses on the south side of campus. The officers pursued him on foot. He turned a corner, and by the time they reached the same intersection, he was gone. He had disappeared into the residential streets, and without a clear description beyond dark hoodie and beanie, they couldn't continue the search. But he had dropped something. Near the bike rack where he had been standing, one of the officers found a canvas messenger bag lying on the ground. The strap had apparently caught on a bicycle pedal during his hurried exit, and he had either not noticed or decided not to stop for it. The bag was dark green, worn at the corners, and heavy. The officers opened it in front of me. Inside were 3 camera lenses, a spare battery, a roll of gaffer tape, a folded windbreaker, a knit hat, a pair of sunglasses, and a set of keys attached to a branded storage facility tag with a unit number printed on it, 1147. The facility name and address were printed in small letters beneath the unit number. Reyes photographed the tag and the contents of the bag, secured everything as evidence, and told me to go home and lock my door. The investigation moved faster than I expected. The storage facility was a commercial complex on Southeast Foster Road, about 20 minutes from campus. Reyes coordinated with the Portland Police Bureau, and within 48 hours, they had obtained the necessary legal authority to open Unit 1147. I wasn't present for the search, but Reyes and the lead detective, a woman named Okafor, described it to me in detail during a meeting at the police bureau the following week. The unit was 10 by 10 feet, climate-controlled, and almost entirely full. The walls were covered with photographs, hundreds of them printed in various sizes and pinned to corkboard panels that had been mounted directly onto the metal walls. The photographs were organized chronologically, starting from the far left wall and continuing around the room in a continuous timeline. They showed me walking to class, sitting in the library, entering the laboratory, riding the bus, buying coffee, standing at a crosswalk, sitting on a bench in the park, carrying groceries up the stairs to my apartment. The timeline covered almost 18 months. On a folding table in the center of the unit, investigators found printed maps of Portland with my routes highlighted in yellow marker. They found notebooks filled with handwritten schedules, my class times, my lab hours, my bus routes, the days I visited the grocery store, the evenings I stayed late. They found a detailed floor plan of the laboratory building, including the location of my workstation on the 2nd floor. They found a printed copy of my graduate program's course catalog, with my name circled next to 3 classes. They found a stack of clothing, different jackets, hats, scarves, and shoes, organized in plastic bins by season. They also found a compact portable photo printer with fresh cartridges and a small digital photo frame, still plugged into a battery pack, cycling through images taken from inside the campus quad, the library, and the hallway outside the graduate student lounge. He had been watching me for a year and a half. The oldest photographs in the unit were not from Portland. They were from a campus tour. Okafor showed me one of them during our meeting. It was a slightly grainy image taken from a distance, showing a small group of prospective students walking across the main quad behind a tour guide holding a yellow flag. I was in the group, wearing a blue jacket I no longer owned, looking up at the science building with an expression I recognized as nervous excitement. I remembered that day. It was the spring before I applied to the program. I had flown in from Arizona for a weekend visit, trying to decide whether Portland was where I wanted to spend the next 2 years of my life. I hadn't decided to move to Portland yet when that photograph was taken. I hadn't been accepted to the program. I hadn't signed a lease. I hadn't told anyone outside my family that I was seriously considering the university. I was one of 15 prospective students on a walking tour, and a man I had never noticed had singled me out from the group and taken my photograph. His name was Daniel. He was 28 years old. At the time of the campus tour, he had been working as a temporary facilities worker for the university, assigned to unlock buildings and set up rooms for weekend events. During my tour, our group had stopped at the science building, and the door was locked. A young man in a gray university polo shirt had jogged over with a key ring, unlocked the door, held it open for the group, and smiled at us as we filed inside. I remembered him now, vaguely. He had held the door and said something like, "Welcome to the future." I had smiled back and walked past him into the lobby. That was the entire interaction. 3 seconds, a held door, a generic greeting, and he had chosen me. He was identified through the storage unit rental agreement, which was in his real name, and through the university's employment records, which confirmed his temporary position during the spring of my campus visit. He was arrested at his apartment in Southeast Portland 2 days after the storage unit was searched. He did not resist. He did not attempt to flee. According to Okafor, he was sitting at his kitchen table when the officers arrived, and he looked at them as if he had been expecting them for a long time. The charges included stalking, harassment, and related offenses supported by the documented pattern of targeted monitoring. The legal proceedings are still ongoing as of the time I'm recording this, and I've been asked not to discuss specific details of the case. What I can say is that a restraining order is in place, that he is no longer employed by the university, and that the storage unit and its contents have been entered into evidence. I finished my master's degree. I defended my thesis in the spring and graduated in June. I moved to a different city afterward, partly for a job and partly because I couldn't walk across the Portland campus without scanning every bike rack, every overpass, every window in every building for a camera lens pointed in my direction. Sam asked me once, near the end of the process, what the hardest part was. I thought about it for a long time before I answered. The hardest part wasn't the photographs. It wasn't the storage unit. It wasn't the months of looking over my shoulder and jumping at shadows and wondering whether the person sitting behind me in the cafe was a stranger or any observer. The hardest part was the oldest photograph, the one from the campus tour, the one taken before I had made any decisions, before I had committed to anything, before I had any reason to believe that Portland would become my home. That photograph meant he had selected me before I had even selected myself. He had watched me walk through a door I hadn't yet decided to walk through, and he had started building a room full of my life before my life in that city had even begun. I think about that photograph more than any of the others. Not because it's the most frightening image. It's actually the most ordinary, just a blurry shot of a group of students on a sunny afternoon. But because it represents the moment when someone I had never met, someone I had smiled at for 3 seconds and immediately forgotten, decided that I was going to be the center of his world. And I didn't know. I walked through that door, I took the tour, I applied to the program, I moved across the country, I built a life in a city I chose because I loved the rain and the trees and the quiet. And the entire time, from the very first day, someone was already there. Already watching. Already waiting. Page 5 people. 5 ordinary lives disrupted, not by supernatural forces or elaborate conspiracies, but by the quiet exploitation of things we all take for granted. A forgotten tablet, a magnetic tracker, a maintenance corridor, a calendar permission, a held door. None of these stories involve a stalker who was faster, stronger, or smarter than the people they targeted. They involve stalkers who were patient, who understood that the easiest way to know where someone is going is not to follow them, but to find the small, overlooked channel through which their movements are already being shared. If any of these stories resonated with you, I'd like to hear which one stayed with you the longest. Leave a comment below, and if you haven't already, consider subscribing to Mind After Dark for more stories like these. The next time you arrive somewhere and the parking lot feels a little too quiet, the lobby a little too still, the stranger across the room a little too settled, remember that the most dangerous person in the space may not be the one who followed you there. They may be the one who arrived first.